Hit record. And welcome everyone. We'll be starting in 2 minutes.
And Harper, we're going to do the Q&A at the end. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll be keeping track of chat too.
Okay. I hope I can keep my earbuds off the whole time. There may be some construction outside. I might have to.
Well, you sound great. You're good.
I would prefer to not wear my earbuds. So.
All right. Looks like we've got 16 participants already. This is great.
Nice.
All right, we'll be starting in 1 minute. Hello from Arizona. Hi, Brian. Welcome.
Ours too, Brian.
Yes.
Too.
All right, we are at the top of the hour. Welcome everyone to our session today. Statistics are everywhere. Connecting statistics to business careers. I'm excited to introduce Doane Seward from the Leeds School of Business at University of Colorado, Boulder, and an esteemed author. She is our co-author for Applied Statistics in Business and Economics. And David Doane is also here today. And we will be starting out. I just want to just have a little housekeeping. And here we go. So this is a Zoom webinar. So you're welcome to use the chat and the Q&A. We will be recording this session. But any of your questions, I will be, you are on mute, so I will be directing questions to Lori towards the end and then collecting them over the course of the event. But I'm going to stop sharing now and turn it over to Doane Seward. Welcome, Lori.
Thanks, Harper. And hello to everyone. I can't see everyone, but I'm glad to know that there's so many that have joined us today. So I am going to pull up my slides. And as Harper said, I am faculty at the Leeds School of Business. And so I'm going to be talking today about my students and how they've made connections to their work and found lots of uses for statistics in their jobs. So our agenda today is I'll do a very brief introduction of myself and then talk about how I help our students make connections using a couple of different ways. I'll give examples of my use of the discussion feature on Canvas and also share with you feedback from students that I've pulled out of their discussion posts, as well as a project that I use in my statistics courses. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. I won't talk for the whole 45 minutes. So as Harper said, I am at the Leeds School of Business. I'm a professor of operations management. I've been at Leeds for over 20 years now, and I am also the faculty director of all of our MBA programs. We have several MBA programs and even launched a new MBA program this year. Over the past 15, 20 years, I've also been working closely with David Doane, who you see here. He and I co-author Applied Statistics in Business and Economics, which we're very happy to say is now published in the 7th edition. So I've taught a wide variety of courses over the years, but currently these are the courses that I focus on. So I teach a quantitative methods course, which is an MBA core statistics course offered for our full-time MBA students and our working professional programs the evening. And we have a newly launched hybrid MBA program, and I teach across all 3 of those programs. Leeds has also recently launched an executive MBA program, new this year, and I teach a statistics course titled Data and Uncertainty. So it covers similar topics, focusing primarily on hypothesis testing and regression analysis, but delivered to an executive audience. And then I also am teaching a senior level undergraduate course titled Managing Business Processes that uses quite a bit of statistics, particularly when we spend time talking about waiting line models. So we introduce all kinds of probability distributions and so forth. So examples are always great. And David and I have worked very hard to provide real world examples in our textbook. However, we all know that most of us learn best by doing. And so helping our students see where statistics is applied at their place of work is a great way for them to see the usefulness of all of the tools that we deliver in our stats classes. In face-to-face class meetings, when I ask students in the classroom, so how could you imagine this being used at work? The students sometimes have a difficult time in the moment thinking about where statistics could be used. And over the last couple of years, even before COVID, Leeds had been piloting hybrid courses where some of the course material was delivered asynchronously. And what these hybrid courses allowed us to do was start exploring more of the tools in our learning management system, and we use Canvas on our campus. I had not been a big user of the discussion tool on Canvas in my face-to-face courses, relying more on the in-classroom conversations. But with our hybrid delivery, I'm now using the discussion feature on Canvas extensively. And we're starting to develop best practices around the discussion feature. So I'd like to share with you a few of the discussion prompts that I have students respond to. And one thing that I've found over this past year is that the students are much more thoughtful in their responses and they respond with more information. Sometimes it felt in the classroom that the students were really waiting for their turn to speak rather than listening to each other. And I've found in these discussion posts that students are actually paying attention to what their fellow classmates are saying. They're entering into a real conversation. And I'll come in periodically and make comments. What I tend to do is when I'll put up a discussion, have it open for about a week. I have a due date, and then I go in at the end, the day after the due date has passed, and pull out the common themes from the discussion, summarize those for the students, and I try to add some new information. I've learned a ton from my students through these discussion posts. So I'll be sharing some of their posts with you this afternoon. So here's an example of a discussion post I recently had up for the students. One of the companies that has provided great real world examples for us to use in our textbook is Noodles and Company. And one of the data sets they shared with us was the use of a punch card that they used several years ago. And they were exploring the relationship between the use of the punch card and their sales growth. across a set of stores that they had at the time. And so I use this data set when I'm teaching correlation analysis, and I let the students do the correlation analysis, compare the use of punch cards to sales growth. And what they find is that there was a negative correlation between those two variables, which is very interesting. So typically I would have this discussion in a face-to-face class, but this particular lesson was part of my asynchronous lesson plan. And so I had the students talk about the results in a discussion post. I also shared a short article on Starbucks rewards program. Over this past year in 2020 and even in 2021, Starbucks has seen incredible growth in their business, and they attribute a lot of that to their revamp of their rewards program. And so they read the article, they do the data analysis, and then they come online and do a post. And at the bottom here, you'll notice that we have three prompts for the students: acknowledge your classmates' post, build upon the post by providing more information, maybe some personal perspectives, upload an article that you find, and then conclude with a question or a new idea. And so this ABC approach to discussions really brings out a lot of information from the students. So I'm just going to grab one post from a student. He says, this is a student of mine who actually works as an attorney, and his class, he has several classmates who are in the healthcare industry and either as practitioners or researchers, and they all chimed in on the post to say that, well, we can't use a rewards program in the health business, that would be unethical. And so this student chimed in with the fact that there is actually a way to provide incentives through the Safe Harbors program, and basically health organizations are trying to remove barriers for those who are seeking out healthcare. He even ties it back to Starbucks because he found an article to benchmark off of Starbucks, what hospitals can learn from Starbucks. And it was a fascinating follow-on conversation after he brought this post up. So here's an example of how we might be able to use rewards programs, or I guess we could call them incentives in healthcare. I also recently just finished a couple of asynchronous lesson plans on bivariate regression, and I wanted to hear how students are using this in their workplace, or if they're not, how their colleagues might be using regression analysis. And so sent them out on a mission to see how regression might be used at their work. And again, we have the ABC prompt here, and I'm going to grab a post. So one of my students works as a warehouse manager and says he's used ordinary least squares regression to estimate how much their labor costs vary based on the value of the shipments, and had even run the regression analysis and provided some results here where they found that in general, every additional dollar of product shipped results in 3 cents additional hourly wages, and reported his R squared. So the posts that we find that I've read through, this actually was just due last week. So lots of really interesting examples. This is one that I'll be able to use with undergraduate students because it's pretty simple to understand. So I was very happy to see that they were using regression analysis. I'm gonna also share an email that I received from a student who took a class with me this past summer. After the class was over, she sent me a note to say never in her life did she think she would ever be interested and enjoy a statistics class. She works at Lockheed Martin in the HR area, and she says she started a stretch assignment project within their people analytics team to further her work with hypothesis testing and regression analysis, which has really impressed her leader. Now, I'm sorry to say I can't say exactly what the project is because I need to follow up with her, but it was very exciting for me to see this response from a student who had taken one of my classes. So I'm going to start with a few simple examples. Some of them showed up on the discussion post. Some of them showed up in the class. When we teach a hybrid course, some of the lessons are asynchronous, but we still do about 50% of our contact hours in person with the students. So I have a student who works for a small town near Boulder, and she came in with a question. She said, I noticed data on population growth for our town, and I saw a huge increase, and yet I also saw a report that said there was only a 5.6% average growth rate, and I'm trying to understand the difference between these two measures. So she gave us data on the 2010 population, the 2021 population. You can do the calculation. It's an 85% increase over those 12 years. But if you use the geometric mean, you can actually calculate the average growth rate, which was 5.6%. So it was a great opportunity to apply a summary statistic measure to a real world example. Here's a student that posted on one of our discussion boards about trying to apply the binomial distribution. He works in network engineering, and he's always been curious if he could use their service level agreements as a way to hone in on their staffing levels. And he was looking at how often they meet their service level agreements and assumed that that would be a binomial distribution because it met the characteristics for a binomial distribution. And so that created a conversation with his classmates on the discussion board. We didn't have this conversation in the classroom, but I thought that was pretty clever of him to think about how he could use the binomial distribution. I have lots of students who come to our programs who work in residential real estate or the construction industry. And as we all know, over this past year and a half, the supply chains have been disrupted and the price of building materials has skyrocketed. So the students were tracking this throughout the term and using their new charting tools to visually look at prices going up. And this is an article that one of the students posted in June when they saw that things were starting to level off a bit and start to come down. So they were having fun applying the Excel charting tools. Here's another student who's looking at sales and how to apply confidence intervals. And he is commenting on the fact that it seems there's a lot of guesswork in setting forecasts. And I have to say that I see this a lot. That's when I ask students who work in sales how their team forecasts, a lot of times they say it's guesswork, or they might just increase their targets 5% or 10%, which is what this student said, that they were just adding 5% from last year's sales. He says, however, with the tools from this class, I think I can take a sample size of sales from years past, calculate a mean and a standard deviation, and use this to calculate a confidence interval that I could then use to forecast sales, the average sales for the next year. So it was great to see that the student was applying confidence intervals. Some of our students actually published results of work that they do. This actually is an excerpt from a paper that was published by a former student of ours. She worked at an outpatient mental health facility as a quality control analyst, and she was looking at the percentage of no-show appointments. She happens to now be an instructor for us. She went on to finish her PhD, and so she shared her work with a class that she was teaching, and the students were quite thrilled to see this and think about how they might be able to use it in their own work. Here's a quote from a student who works as an insurance broker, and she always wondered how they factored the insurance premiums that she was selling to clients. It baffled me how expensive it was to purchase auto insurance and health insurance. Now that I understand regression and can apply it to the insurance world, it's become fascinating. And we all know, for those of us who teach statistics, that we can use some very simple tools like empirical probability calculations or expected value calculations and apply it to the insurance world as well. I had a student this past summer who had started a business back in 2015 where they provided vape cartridges for the cannabis industry. And he shared the results of some research that had been done in concert with his business. And I'm just going to grab the last line here because this is science that I don't really understand. But he says the data analysis from this paper is directly related to what we're learning in chapters 12 and 13, simple and multiple regression. And he provided some excerpts from this work as well. So here you go, statistics in the cannabis industry. We have quite a few engineers in our program, and so we'll see lots of obvious ties to manufacturing processes, but it's always interesting for the engineers to try to apply these analytical tools to the work that they might be doing with sales. So this particular engineering student works to get their product written into specifications at manufacturers in order to boost sales, and is suggesting a model, a bivariate regression model that they could use to see if having more of their product written into specifications boosts their sales, if there is a correlation there, and curious as to what that effect actually is. And so he posted this on a discussion board and generated a lot of conversation, in some ways helping other students just understand why it was so important for their product to be written into specifications in the first place. And then students were helping him troubleshoot a little bit about how he might go about doing the study. Here's a student who took a short course during his quant methods course in the MBA program, learning how to code with R and Java and Python, and was pretty excited at the end of the course. After going through the short course, he says, that's where I finally was able to see how Java worked. So to use statistics, a Java program was used to adjust observations to expected levels. I'm going to kind of skip over here to compare the difference in means and give p-values for differential expression. And he said, after a lot of work, he was excited to finally apply some statistics to his research. He saw that as an aha moment. So pretty complex research there, but it was exciting for him to see that p-values were actually used. Here's a student who works for a company that does clinical trials on new medications, and she had actually come to class with this. I constantly hear our analysts push back on testing data at intermediate points in our clinical trials. They say these intermediate tests spend alpha, and I always wondered what they meant by that. Now that I know about type 1 and type 2 errors, it makes so much more sense. And so this phrase spending alpha, for those who haven't heard it before, is really about spreading type 1 error across the intermediate trials so that you don't inflate type 1 error by doing intermediate tests. And so that's the idea behind spending alpha. It's a pretty, the functions used to determine sample sizes and so forth are pretty complex, but that phrase is really related to type 1 and type 2 errors, and she finally understood it. The other thing that I do in my courses is I require students to work on a group project where they have to develop a multiple regression model using a data set of their own choosing. I don't provide the data for them. And because right now I teach graduate level courses where almost all of the students are working, I encourage them to bring in data from their work if at all possible. And I've found that the students who do these projects with real data coming from one of their team members' workplace actually get a lot more out of the project. There are always students who want to look at sports data and they'll go to the World Bank and that sort of thing, and which is great. They can do some really interesting work with that. But those who work with the messiness of data that comes from their workplace really get a lot out of the project. And, there are always different outcomes. One of the things that I stress with this is that I'm not grading them on how high their R-squared value is. I'm grading them on the process and making sure that they follow the correct process. They get worried if they find that there's not significant correlation between the variables they've chosen. And I tell them that's okay. That's information. And it's important to add to the body of knowledge, even when things aren't correlated. This has been one of the most popular and valuable parts of my course over the past years. And I learn as much from my students as they learn going through this process. So I'll just share a few examples of projects that my students have worked on. So just recently, I had a group of students work on predicting revenue as a function of calls, chats, and emails for a bicycle reseller company called Pros Closet. Pros Closet is located here in Boulder, and they, as many of you probably know, bicycles are quite scarce right now. During the pandemic, bicycle sales went through the roof. And so Pros Closet has been doing an amazing business over the past 18 months. And so she brought in data to do some analysis on their revenue. I had a medical student in class who had access to surgical data for patients who were going through a valve repair surgery. And one of the questions he wanted to know was if these variables, age, bypass, a blood transfusion, and atrial fibrillation, were correlated or helped explain the variation in length of stay in the hospital for these patients. It turned out that the only variable that was significant was the binary variable, whether the patient had had a blood transfusion or not. And his multiple regression boiled down to a 2-sample test. And there was a significant relationship between, or I should say there was a significant difference between those patients who had had a blood transfusion and those who had not. Now, while he was hoping that there was more correlation with these other variables, he felt that he could go back and pull more data and look at other variables that might be correlated with length of stay as well. So that was an interesting project for him as well as his teammates. They learned a lot. I, a few years back, had a student who worked in the wellness industry, and she would often take part in what's considered long format television advertising. So some of you might be familiar with these. They're typically 30-minute programs that air mid-morning after the national news programs end, like the Today Show. And she would conduct these 30-minute TV programs as an interview on one of our local channels to generate calls from potential clients. And she knew that the number of calls was positively correlated with revenue, but she wanted to understand better what drove folks to make phone calls. And so her response variable was number of calls, and she had several predictor variables that she was looking at that dealt with primarily the types of material that she was discussing when she was on air. I had a student who worked with Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, and they had seen a big spike in membership, and he wanted to understand what might be driving that. And he pulled together a data set with these variables, advertising and social media posts and that sort of thing. Excuse me. And one of the more fun projects was a student who worked in the marketing department for the Denver Broncos. In 2018, the Denver Broncos rolled out mobile ticketing. They created an app, and it was the only way for you to get into the stadium, no more paper tickets. And they collected lots of survey data from the fans and didn't really know what to do with it, to tell you the truth. And so he used that data for his project in the class to figure out which variables were correlated with satisfaction, overall satisfaction. So the response variable was overall satisfaction, and they were using satisfaction with the stadium Wi-Fi, whether the fan was a season ticket holder or not, how soon before the kickoff they arrived, and what mobile operating platform they had. And so that was a study that they did for the Denver Broncos. So that was a lot of fun. I have lots of other examples, but these are the ones that I thought I wanted to share with you this morning. And I want to leave you with a quote from a student this summer who says, "I believe I'm the oldest guy in our class. I was a freshman in college when Nirvana released Nevermind. I took 4 semesters of stats as an undergrad. I thought I had a solid handle on everything we just learned in class. But then I did a big brain dump later in life." And he was excited to relearn the material that he had learned as a younger student. And his advice to everyone else is to intentionally retain the knowledge. If your current job doesn't require it, make sure you keep it fresh in your brain, because at some point you'll want to use it. So I am going to stop there, and we have some time for Q&A or comments. And Harper, I think that you're in charge of navigating at this point.
Yes, thanks, Lori. I first wanted to just say that obviously your class is really exciting. I love to see how you've been able to show the relevance to students and really get them excited about statistics. That's really obvious here. That, you know, with the case bases. There were more comments than questions, but one of them was sort of a question about how students are dealing with the uncertainty of data, and how do you answer that question with students, and you know, that sort of concern about data and the uncertainty of how good the data is, how, you know, correct the data is. So
Yeah, well, that's always a big question, particularly when they're working in fields where they have to get things right. It can be scary. You know, if you miss a target with sales of running shoes, it's not catastrophic, right? But if you're working in an engineering field and you need to design a product with very precise specifications, it can be challenging. And so what was interesting is because I'm fortunate to work with students who are working, and often there's someone in the classroom who is applying this in a real world setting, they provide a lot of input. And so as an example, this question came up about confidence intervals and margin of error. So, you know, there's uncertainty around our estimates because we're using sample data. I actually had a student in class who's worked in product design who said that they build in factors to take into account the uncertainty of data. And so within their industry, they have well-known factors that they use on a regular basis just to deal with the fact that they're only using sample data. The other thing I talk about is when you're conducting a hypothesis test or calculating a confidence interval, the idea is that you're using other pieces of information besides that one statistic. So the p-value that you get after you complete your analysis is not the only piece of information that goes into a decision. You still have to rely on your expertise. You still have to consider consequences of errors. I do spend a lot of time talking about type 1 and type 2 error and what the consequences could be on either side. So we spend time in class exploring that. And in fact, one of my discussion posts for an asynchronous lesson was not a numerical analysis question at all. It was just having students brainstorm about consequences of a type 1 or type 2 error in a given situation. So talking through those potential consequences of making a decision with uncertain data helps them understand what the risks might be and what they could do to minimize those risks. David, did you want to add anything to that?
Not to that particular thread. I do have a couple of comments, but I see you have a question from Brian about the Denver Bronco study.
Okay.
Yes, he says that you mentioned the Denver Broncos study with survey. Do you have any assignments where people have to design surveys with the intention of apply analytics to the result? Input, response variable, confidence rating versus discrete values.
So actually, I don't assign a project where they have to design a survey. We do have we have several marketing analytics courses where they would do that kind of work, but they don't do that in my quant methods course.
I might make a comment. Lori's examples point to a difficulty that authors face when we write a book. We try to have relevant examples that are timely, but by the time we put anything in the book, the world has moved on and it's outdated. So these are beautiful examples that Lori is providing. Unfortunately, a lot of data that students will bring to us will be proprietary. So there's no way we can use it, but they make great examples for a forum like this. And I'm not sure what the solution is. We have tried to include some large data sets that are relevant and not too dated. Things on maternity stays that are kind of timeless. And we have sports data, but that's not exactly business relevant, but it's interesting to a lot of students. I know that in my experience, the engineers are usually pretty quick to find ways to use data. But I think one appealing part of what Lori is talking about is how frequently they are used in service areas and HR and some of the other areas. There's a tendency to think stats is relevant mainly in finance or some other highly quantitative area. But these are great examples Lori's given. Surveys, I wish I knew the answer to that. It's hard to design assignments on surveys.
It is. Brian, you asked how we grade the discussion posts. So I have an engagement element to my grade. And I have two types of assessments that make up my engagement in the asynchronous environment. So all of my discussions have been tied to a group exercise. And the group exercise is submitted, and then there's a discussion that follows it. So the Noodles and Company example is a perfect one. So first they had to analyze the data, and I had them do a test for significant correlation. And so they had to upload the results of that with their study group or their team, and then individually they post. And so after the post closes, I go in and give a simple 3-point rating, 1, 2, or 3, depending on the level of detail that they provided and how they moved the conversation forward. Now, I don't grade the post and post it let me rephrase that. I grade their posts for my own purposes. I don't post a score on the discussions every week. At the end of the term, I compile my weekly points, I guess you will, and together with how they did on the group assignments, and give a score. And not everyone earns 100%. I have some students who have missed the discussions, so they just didn't take part in it, and that's an easy one to look at. But it's subjective. And they're aware of that. They know how they're doing on the group exercise submissions. And if a student just isn't engaged, I've reached out to them and said, hey, I haven't seen anything from you in the last couple of weeks. You need to get on there. I want to hear your thoughts, that sort of thing. And we've agreed, those of us who are teaching in these programs have agreed on that approach. So it is somewhat, there's really no other way to do it other than this subjective. And it's work. One of the things I've found is that I have to be really focused in my discussion prompts. Otherwise, they can just go way off topic. So.
There was another question about,
The class.
Whether it was in-person, hybrid, or remote. Yeah.
So this class that you're looking right here is a hybrid model with a residency. So we do about 6 weeks of asynchronous lessons, and then we're bringing the students together for a week. This is for the executive MBA program. So the week-long residency is in person. For my other MBA courses, my full-time is all in person. And I don't do as much on the discussion posts with the full-time students, but with the evening and hybrid. So these are working professionals who are probably 5 years into their career. And for those students, I do have one in-person cohort that I meet one night a week. And then the other cohort, which is hybrid, we do every other Saturday across 7 weeks. So I actually meet them I end up meeting them 3 Saturdays, and then the rest of it's asynchronous. I'm trying to remember if I met them 3 or 4, something like that. That was in the summer. During the regular semester, fall and spring, they come once a month on a Saturday.
Lori, I'm going to guess, based on the breadth of examples that you've shared, you don't give them any limit on what they want to submit in terms of projects or.
Oh, no, the only thing I do is make sure that it hasn't been published already. I did have, this year I had a group of students who submitted a data set that had already been published with the results. No, you can't do that. They're going to, what is it? The data site, Kaggle, they're going there and looking for data now. And some of that data has been published with the results. So I try to vet the data. I do vet the data before they start on their project. And so there's always a lot of uncertainty about what they're going to find and how I need to consult with them. I always plan a consulting night where I consult with the groups on their projects before, and then they have to present to the class.
All right. I do not see any other questions. David, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we?
No, not at all. Lori, thank you. This is beautiful. I really like these examples.
Yeah, that was fun. Most of those discussion posts that I showed later on came from my hybrid and evening courses.
All right, fantastic. In the chat, I did add, we will be having another virtual event that's going to be solely focused on business statistics and analytics next Friday, October 1st. It is open registration. So if you are interested in attending, we will be sending out sort of a mass invite at the beginning of next week. Feel free to grab the link in the chat, and you're welcome to join that as well. It's an all-day event where you can sort of come and go and join sessions similar to what you had today. But all be statistics and analytics, and we hope to see you there. We are thrilled to have you, and Lori, I can't thank you enough. This has been a great presentation. And I love to see how much excitement around statistics you're creating with your class, and it sounds like students are taking it beyond. So that's great. Oh, more
Glad
questions.
to be here.
Thanks,
Murray.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the event.